want to talk about predicting my race finish at the Boston Marathon, the 2022 Boston Marathon. Now this video isn't just about me, although I will be using me as an example. It's more about race predictors and some of the race predictors that are available out there that will help you predict your race. That's what they're there for. It's right in the name. But here's the thing, and the more that I have thought about making this video and the more that I have looked at different race predictors and then I've thought about the race that I'm doing, I just want you to know that all these race predictors, they need to be taken with a pinch of salt. Now, of course, they're going to give you a better idea than just asking some non-runner off the street what they predict your marathon time will be, right? We know that. It's based on data. It's based on past results. And we're using these past performances to predict future outcomes. But there are a lot of variables that don't get put into these calculators. For example, all these race calculators assume that you have put in the training needed to run the distance that you're predicting. So if you say run a 5K in 20 minutes, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be able to run a 10K in 40 minutes. And it's really not that surprising to find out that the longer our race is, the slower we are going to be able to cover that distance. So for those of you that have been following this channel for a while, you know that I've had a couple of races in the past. Not too many. We're still coming back from COVID, so I haven't been racing that much. Now the one recent race that I did was the Venice Half Marathon. And that is a number that I'm going to be putting into the calculators in order to help me predict my Boston Marathon finish time. And here's where the pinch of salt really comes in. The Venice Half Marathon was a pancake flat course. Yeah, there were a couple of little hills, but really in the scheme of things, it wasn't anything to detract from my speed on the course, right? The Venice Half Marathon is very flat, it's very fast. But here's another variable. It was very warm that day that I went out and did it. Very warm and very humid. So I have to take that into account when predicting my future race times. And on the other end, as I said, the Venice Half Marathon was very flat. The Boston Marathon is fairly hilly. Now it is a net downhill course, but for those of you that are familiar with the Boston Marathon, there is a big drop in the first 10K. And then it kind of undulates for a little bit. Then you get to about the 16-mile mark, and that's when you come into the Newton Hills. And then there is a lot of uphill until you get to about mile 21. So ultimately the Boston Marathon is quite tricky because those big hills, the biggest part of elevation that you're going to find on the entire course, comes after you've already been running for a couple hours. And that, if I had to put it in a nutshell, that is what makes the Boston Marathon a bit challenging. The good news is that if you are able to run a good race at Boston, if you're able to charge the hills, if you've put in the time training in the hills, and I haven't, then you can run a very fast time at Boston. Because once you get to the top at around mile 21, it's basically downhill to the finish. Now there are a couple of little uphills along the way, but after what you've already handled between mile 16 and mile 21, it's really nothing to write home about. So with that said, the first race predictor that I want to talk to you guys about is probably the one that, I don't want to say it's the most accurate just because it is the slowest. Oh, and by the way, I am going to be starting with the slowest predicted time and I'm going to work down to the fastest. The first one is actually Stryd. And the Stryd foot pod, it probably knows me pretty well, probably knows me as well as my watch, because I put this thing on every pair of shoes that I go for a run in. So this little foot pod has tracked me for months and months and months. And it really knows what I'm capable of. It knows when I'm running slow, it knows when I pick up the pace, it knows how much power I'm putting down at every moment in time. So with that said, on your screen right now is my actual Stryd dashboard, and I am just going to scroll down and show you this has been my training over, I don't know, the past 42 days. And this line that you see moving right along here, that's my critical power. That's how my critical power has changed over the last 42 days. Now I should say that the features that I'm going to show you on Stryd, this is part of their premium package. You do have to pay $10 a month for this service. And if I move right over here, click on this little icon on the left-hand side, it's going to analyze my race performance. So in a nutshell, Stryd predicts my marathon performance to be run at 90% of critical power. So if your critical power is at 100%, that's the maximum amount of power you can put out for X number of minutes. 90% is supposed to be a power output that you can maintain. And right now you can see that my predicted marathon time is 3 hours, 12 minutes and 54 seconds. But the great thing about Stryd is that if we go over here to the right-hand side, we collect the course, it actually has the Boston Marathon course preloaded in their program. So using the same 90% critical power, Stryd estimates my Boston Marathon finish time to be 3:14:54. You can see the course here. You can see that big drop in the first 10K. And right here is about the 16-mile mark. And then it's all the way uphill. And then it's all the way downhill to the finish. Let's just take a quick peek at my 2019 Boston Marathon. I ran 3 hours, 14 minutes and 12 seconds. Now, what do I mean mean by showing you my 2019 Boston Marathon finish time? Nothing. That was 3 years ago. That actually has no relation to the race that I'm running next week. But I show you that to show that it's in the realm of possibility. I have run that time before. I could possibly do it again on Marathon Monday. Okay, moving right along to the next calculator, which is by Runner's World. And this is the second to slowest predicted time. So let me put the Runner's World predictor up on your screen right now, and we are just going to scroll down to the actual calculator. And here we go. It says my goal race is a marathon. A recent race was a half marathon. And I'm just going to put in my finish time from that Venice half marathon of 1 hour, 29 minutes and 6 seconds. It does give you an option to put in a second race. I don't actually have one. Nothing that is recent enough to count. It then asks how many miles that you have run a week. Now basically, when a calculator is asking you for your training volume, that generally means that it's using the tandem method to calculate your race pace. Now that doesn't mean that all calculators that use the tandem method are going to be the same. They're not, but they're using a similar criteria. I'm not going to put in my highest weekly volume. I'm going to put in my average of the last 4 weeks of solid training. So the 4 weeks before the taper, I averaged 66 miles per week. If I hit calculate, it comes up with a marathon predicted time of 3 hours, 9 minutes and 41 seconds. Now guys, I want you to just remember that that is based off of my time at the Venice Half Marathon, which was a flat course in very humid conditions. I'm using this calculator to predict a course that is far hillier than anything I've ever trained in. So when I see this 309.41, again, I'm taking it with a pinch of salt, but it's a number, right? It's a number. It's actually based on some kind of science, so it's worth paying attention to. And the more data that we get, the more confident we can be about our goals moving forward. Okay, moving right along, the next running predictor that I want to talk about is Run Hive. So let's just go through the steps. Right now, we're going to have our longest race distance. That is going to be a half marathon. We are going to input our finish time. I do not have a shorter race distance that I'm going to put in. My age is 44. I am going to be male. My typical weekly training mileage is going to be 66 miles. If we hit calculate, it shows us that based on my input, they are predicting that I will run a 3:08:27. Now RunHive uses this using an age-graded score. And basically they found out that my half marathon time at the Venice Half Marathon was 68.5% of my age-graded group. They then extrapolate that out to the same age-graded group run at the marathon distance, and they come up with this score, 3:08:27. Okay, next up I want to share with you the marathon race predictor calculator at 538.com. Now 538.com isn't necessarily a running site. In fact, it's not a running site, but they're using a marathon race pace calculator that is based off a 2014 study that was first published in Slate magazine. Now since 2014, they have updated that study. Now this study that this race pace calculator was based on was compiled using the responses from 2,497 responses. That's a pretty good sample size to develop this predictor off of. But let's get right into it. Now if we scroll down, this predictor is going to ask me some questions based on my past race performance and on my history with running. It's asking me about my training regimen. How many miles do you typically run a week while training for your marathon? Again, I'm going to use the average of 66 miles. That is my average training volume over the 4 weeks prior to my taper. You already know my race is a half marathon. I'm going to call this hard because of the heat. It does say right here, it's hard if the race was hilly, hot, or windy. Then it's asking my time. I'm going to put in 1:29:06. It does ask for a second race. I don't have one, so I'm not going to be putting that in. And you can see that as I was putting in the data, the number on the top of the screen was changing, but ultimately it comes out to 3:08:20, 3 hours, 8 minutes and 20 seconds. So with that, let's move on to the next. Okay, the next fastest race prediction for me is Metathon. Now, I really like the way Metathon works because it doesn't require as much work from me in order to get the number. So Metathon uses the tandem method, which takes into account my average weekly volume and my average training pace. That's average training pace. So remember, most of our runs are run very slow. We run a little bit very quickly, we run a lot very slow. And Metathon knows this without me telling it anything because it actually syncs to my Strava. It's like an add-on. You sign into Strava from Metathon, it compiles all the data. It does take a bit of time when you first do it. And Metathon, based on my Strava input, shows me finishing a marathon distance in 3 hours, 6 minutes and 39 seconds. But here's what's pretty nice to see at the bottom of the screen. It tells you what your paces would be as the week's training goes through. So first of all, it's showing me that if I had stopped training 8 weeks ago, I possibly could have run a 3 hour and 15 minute and 4 second marathon. 4 weeks ago, my time would have dropped to 3 hours, 9 minutes and 4 seconds. Last week, it actually looks like I could have run the marathon a little faster. It's given me a predicted time of 3 hours, 6 minutes and 22 seconds. But that's really not surprising, because while I am making this video, I'm already well into my taper. So the data that Metathon is gathering from Strava is going to have a lot more slow runs than it did a week ago, when it was taking into account my fast tempo runs, my interval runs. 3:06:39, again, it's definitely in the ballpark. But yeah, we're heading in the right direction. Let's move on to the next one. Okay, next up, I want to show you the race predictor from my COROS watch. And I gotta say that before I started looking at all these race predictor tools, I really thought that when I looked at my COROS race predictor, that it was pretty spot on. Like when I look at the numbers, I felt like those are numbers that I can realistically reach. We're gonna go to my dashboard on COROS right now. COROS is estimating my marathon value at 78.1, which really doesn't mean anything to any of you that aren't using COROS, but if you're not using COROS, let's just click on this information, and it says that they base these numerical numbers on what they predict your marathon finish times to be. I'm 78.1. If I fall between 71 and 80, it's suggesting that I'm gonna finish a marathon between 3 hours and 3.5 hours. COROS Race Predictor is predicting me in 3 hours, 5 minutes and 49 seconds. It's a little on the low end of what we've seen so far. The next marathon race predictor is coming courtesy of Jack Daniels. This is the runsmartproject.com. When I put in my Venice half marathon of 1:29:06, I calculate my V dot is 51.6. But if we scroll down, it's going to give me my equivalent race times. And it says right here, the marathon, 3:05:45. Now, a lot of you out there stand by the Jack Daniels V dot formula. So this 3:05:45, I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility, but then again, I'm going back to taking everything with a pinch of salt. Might seem to you like I have too much salt in my diet because I take a pinch of salt with everything. Remember, the Boston Marathon course is very hilly. So I think 3:05:45 is a pretty good baseline for a flat marathon for me. And of course, we have to add some time for the hills, but you can see the trend, right? You can see the trend that's going on here. That's a lot of data. Probably shouldn't have looked at so many running calculators, and to be honest, if I wasn't going to make this video, there's no way I would have looked at that many running calculators, because I do find myself getting kind of a data paralysis kind of state. But just to refresh your memory, let me put them up on the screen right now. We have Stryd coming in at 3:14:54, Runner's World at 3:09:41, Run Hive at 3:08:27, 5:38 at 3:08:20, Metathon at 3:06:39, COROS at 3:05:49, and Jack Daniels V dot formula at 3:05:45. So if we take both ends of the spectrum, we have Stryd at 3:14:54. We have Jack Daniels at 3:05:45. That's actually a 9-minute and 9-second spread. What is my race goal going to be? What am I going to take from this data and move forward to run the 2022 Boston Marathon? And I've given this a lot of thought, knowing that most of these predictors are basing their predictions on a flat course. My A goal for the 2022 Boston Marathon is going to be 3 hours and 10 minutes. Or I should say 3 hours and 9 minutes and 59 seconds. My B goal is going to be 3 hours and 15 minutes. And then my C goal will be 3 hours and 20 minutes. Anything slower than 3 hours and 20 minutes, I think it's safe to say that something unplanned would have happened. So I'll be happy with it. I would have been happy just to finish at that point. But guys, thanks for hearing my thoughts on the marathon prediction. If you do want to follow me during the Boston Marathon, it's kind of a pain in the butt. You have to download an app and then put in my number. But I'm going to be posting more information about that in the next couple of days on Instagram and here on YouTube. So if you're interested in following along, you're welcome to. If you can't be bothered, I totally understand. Downloading an app to follow some guy on the internet, it's not for everyone. And also, you're going to be able to hear about it in a couple of days after the race. So whatever you want to do, have at it. All right, guys, be kind, be happy, run well. See you in a couple of days.